My sister announced her pregnancy at my baby shower and told everyone I was faking my struggle to conceive, but she didn't know I had the medical receipts that would turn her miracle into the most humiliating day of her life. Standing in the middle of our parents' sun-drenched backyard in a quiet suburb of Virginia, I was wearing a flowy lavender dress that finally fit over the small, precious bump I had prayed for during 3 agonizing years of failed IVF cycles and hormonal roller coasters. The air was filled with the scent of lilies and the sweet, cloying aroma of vanilla cupcakes, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like the spotlight was finally on me for something happy rather than a tragedy. My husband David was by my side, his hand resting protectively on the small of my back, a silent reminder of the countless nights we'd spent crying on the bathroom floor over negative tests and the false hope infertility label that had become my identity. But then there was Brianna, my younger sister, and the perpetual golden child of the family, who had arrived 30 minutes late wearing a tight, cream-colored silk dress that seemed designed to draw every eye in the room toward her. Brianna had always been the one to faint at my graduations or have a heart attack scare during my engagement dinner, and as I watched her nursing a glass of sparkling cider with a smug, knowing grin, I felt a familiar cold dread settling in my stomach. The moment came just as David stood up to give a toast, thanking everyone for supporting us through our long and difficult journey to this pregnancy. Before he could even finish his sentence, Brianna stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the stone patio, and practically snatched the microphone out of his hand with a manic sort of energy. "I'm so sorry to interrupt this lovely performance," she cooed, her voice dripping with a sugary poison that made the hairs on my neck stand up. "But I just can't let my big sister keep lying to all of you like this." The backyard went so silent, you could hear the wind rustling through the oak trees as my mother dropped her champagne glass, the crystal shattering on the bricks like a gunshot. Brianna didn't even flinch. Instead, she placed a hand on her own perfectly flat stomach and looked at the crowd with fake tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm pregnant too, everyone, 3 months along, and unlike Sarah, I didn't have to invent a struggle for attention. I saw Sarah's journals. I saw the empty boxes of fertility meds she bought online just to leave them in the trash for Mom to find. She was never infertile. She just wanted to be the victim because she couldn't stand that I've always been the prettier, more successful daughter." I felt the floor drop out from under my sandals as a wave of collective gasps rippled through our aunts, cousins, and friends, their gazes shifting from celebration to a sharp, judging suspicion that felt like physical blows. My mother rushed over, not to me, but to Brianna, wrapping her arms around her golden girl while throwing a look of pure, unadulterated disgust in my direction. "Sarah, how could you?" my mom hissed, her voice vibrating with the same disappointment I'd lived with since I was a child. "All those nights I sat with you while you cried about your needles and hormones, was it all just a sick game to steal Brianna's thunder?" David tried to speak, his face red with a mixture of shock and rage, but Brianna cut him off, claiming she had proof of my deception and that her own pregnancy was a natural miracle that I was currently trying to upstage with my theatrical bump. I stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it made my surgical scars ache, realizing that the sister I had shared a bedroom with, the sister I had defended from bullies, was currently trying to execute a character assassination in front of everyone I loved. But as I looked at Brianna's smug, triumphant expression, I remembered the folder tucked inside my diaper bag, the one I had brought to show our grandmother, the actual ultrasound photos, and the mountains of medical bills that had drained our savings. I realized that Brianna had made a fatal mistake. She assumed I was still the quiet, reserved pushover she could bully into silence. My sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharpened diamond of fury that cleared the fog of the betrayal. I wasn't going to cry, and I wasn't going to run. I was going to wait for the exact moment when the golden child felt most secure in her lie, and then I was going to dismantle her world piece by piece, right here in the garden she had turned into my grave. The silence that followed Brianna's announcement wasn't just quiet, it was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of judgment that turned the lavender scent of my perfume into a bitter, metallic tang of betrayal in the back of my throat. I looked at the faces of my aunts and cousins, people who had sent me prinking of you cards and miracle candles for 3 years, and saw their expressions curdle from sympathy into a sharp, jagged disgust. My mother's hand was still wrapped around Brianna's shoulders, her face set in a righteous indignation as she looked at me like I was a stranger she'd found trespassing in her garden. "You always had to be the special one, didn't you, Sarah?" My mother spat, her voice echoing off the brick walls of the house where I'd spent my childhood, being told to let Brianna have her turn. "You saw how much attention she was getting for her promotion, so you invented a tragedy to make us all feel sorry for you. I sat in that waiting room with you for your egg retrieval, crying my eyes out for a daughter who was apparently just playing a role in a low-budget drama." Brianna leaned into our mother, a crocodile tear sliding perfectly down her cheek as she reached into her designer clutch and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook, my private fertility journal that I thought I'd lost months ago. "I found this in her guest room, Mom," Brianna whimpered, her voice loud enough for the back row to hear. "She wrote about how easy it was to manipulate everyone. She even made a list of symptoms to fake so the doctor wouldn't get suspicious. She's been laughing at us behind our backs, using David's hard-earned money to buy props for this fake bump." A wave of murmurs broke out, the word disgusting being tossed around like a physical stone, and David stepped forward, his jaw so tight I thought his teeth might crack. "That journal was a gift from me, Brianna, and those notes were about her anxiety, not a script for a lie," David shouted, his protective instinct flaring, but the crowd wasn't listening to him. They were under the spell of the golden child's performance. My mother grabbed the journal, flipping through the pages with a look of horror, and that's when I realized that Brianna hadn't just stolen it. She had altered it. She had used a pen with the same color ink to add entries I never wrote, fabricating a narrative of deception to ensure I would be permanently exiled from the family. Brianna looked at me, a tiny, triumphant smirk flashing for only a split second before she turned back to the crowd, clutching her stomach. "And now she's trying to upstage my actual natural pregnancy with this charade," she cried, pointing at my belly. "I'm the one who's actually carrying a grandchild, and she's just carrying a grudge." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. She was claiming my greatest pain as her own victory while trying to erase the very existence of the child I was currently feeling kick against my ribs. I felt a surge of adrenaline that cleared the last of the medicinal fog from my brain, a cold, crystalline focus that I hadn't felt in years. I reached into my diaper bag, which was sitting on the table next to the half-eaten cupcakes, and pulled out a thick manila envelope I'd originally intended to give to my grandmother to explain why I'd been so distant during the IDF process. "You want to talk about scripts and props, Brianna?" I said, my voice steady and low, cutting through her theatrical sobbing like a razor. "Let's talk about receipts." I walked to the center of the patio, the crowd parting like the Red Sea as they saw the look in my eyes. I didn't look at my mother, and I didn't look at the whispering aunts. I kept my gaze locked on my sister, whose smirk was beginning to falter as she saw the sheer volume of paperwork in my hands. "This is the itemized billing from the Virginia Fertility Center for the last 36 months, I announced, holding up the first stack of papers. "It includes the dates of every injection, every ultrasound, and every cent of the $60,000 David and I spent while you were busy finding yourself on a spiritual retreat in Tulum that Mom paid for." I saw my mother's eyes widen as she caught a glimpse of the official medical letterhead. I pulled out a series of high-resolution ultrasound photos, ones that showed a tiny fluttering heartbeat and a developing spine, images that no prop or theatrical bump could ever replicate. "And these," I continued, my voice rising in power, "are the photos from last Tuesday. That's my son, Brianna. He's very real, and unlike your natural miracle, he has a medical record that spans 3 years of struggle." Brianna's face went from pale to a sickly mottled gray as she realized her golden child status was the only thing protecting her from the avalanche of truth I was about to unleash. She tried to grab the papers from my hand, shrieking that I was doctoring the evidence, but David stepped between us, a wall of solid support that she couldn't bypass. I looked at my mother, who was now staring at the ultrasound photos in my hand, her hands trembling as the reality of her own cruelty began to sink in. "You believed her, Mom," I said, the words heavy with 20 years of being the other daughter. "You believed the girl who lied about her SAT scores and the girl who borrowed your wedding ring and lost it over the daughter who has never given you a reason to doubt her." But I'm not finished yet, because if Brianna is 3 months pregnant, I'd love for her to explain why I found a box of positive pregnancy tests on Amazon under her recent orders last week when I was helping her set up her new laptop. The backyard went so quiet you could hear the distant sound of a lawnmower 3 streets over, and as Brianna's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish, I realized that the miracle she was using to bury me was about to become the very thing that finally set me free from the shadow of the golden child. The gasp that left my mother's lips this time wasn't one of indignation for Brianna, but a sharp, ragged sound of dawning horror that seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the garden. Brianna's face, which had been a mask of triumphant malice just moments ago, suddenly drained of all color, leaving her looking like a wax figure melting under the harsh Virginia sun. "You're lying!" she shrieked, her voice hitting a frequency that made the nearby wind chimes jar and rattle. But the pitch was too high, too desperate, the telltale sign of a cornered animal realizing the trap has finally snapped shut. I didn't flinch. I simply reached into the side pocket of my diaper bag and pulled out my phone, opening the screenshot I'd taken of her recent orders page while she was in the kitchen getting us wine last Tuesday. I stepped closer to our mother, holding the screen inches from her face so she could see the clear digital trail of a pack of 5 false positive pregnancy tests ordered exactly 3 weeks before my baby shower, delivered to Brianna's apartment under her own name. "I wasn't snooping, Brianna," I said, my voice dropping into a register of cold, clinical precision that felt like a scalpel. "I asked you to help me migrate your files to your new laptop, and your browser history was wide open. I saw the order, I saw the tracking number, and I saw the delivered notification that coincided exactly with the day you started feeling nauseous on Sunday brunch." The garden, which had been a theater of my public execution, was now a courtroom where the golden child was the lead defendant. My Aunt Martha, who had been the most vocal about calling my pregnancy a performance, snatched the phone from my hand, her eyes squinting as she read the product description out loud, her voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and growing rage. The murmur of disgusting returned, but this time the stones weren't being thrown at me. They were being aimed directly at the sister who had just accused an infertile woman of faking a miracle. Brianna tried to snatch the phone back, her designer nails scraping against the screen, but David caught her wrist, his grip firm and unyielding, as he looked down at her with a look of pure, unmitigated loathing. "Don't touch her, Brianna," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. "You've done enough damage for one lifetime. If you're actually 3 months pregnant, show us the ultrasound photos. Not the ones Sarah has, but yours. Show us the heartbeat you claimed I was paying props for." Brianna began to hyperventilate, a performance I had seen her give 1,000 times when she wanted to get out of a math test or avoid a grounding. But this time, the audience was beginning to see the wires behind the puppet show. She clutched her stomach, doubling over and claiming she was having a sympathetic contraction from the stress I was putting her through. But even my mother, the woman who had spent 25 years enabling this madness, stayed rooted to her stot, her hands frozen midair as she looked from the Amazon receipts to the very real medical-grade ultrasound of my son. The betrayal in my mother's eyes was a jagged thing to witness. It was the look of a woman realizing she had traded her relationship with her stable, honest daughter for a fantasy built on the whims of a sociopath. "Tell me it isn't true, Brianna," my mother whispered, her voice sounding skeletal and thin, a shadow of the authority she usually wielded. "Tell me you didn't buy fake tests to upstage your sister's baby shower. Tell me you didn't steal her journal and write those lies in it." Brianna looked at her, her eyes darting around the backyard like she was looking for an escape route that didn't exist, and when she realized no one was going to catch her this time, her mask didn't just slip, it shattered into 1,000 shards of pure, ugly envy. "And what if I did?" she spat, standing up straight and wiping the fake tears from her face with the back of her hand, her voice suddenly devoid of the sugary cooing. "You are all obsessed with her. For 3 years it's been poor Sarah and Sarah's IVF and Sarah's needles. I got a promotion to vice president and all you did was ask if Sarah's second cycle worked. I'm the pretty one, I'm the successful one, and I wasn't going to sit here and watch everyone bring her gifts and rub her stomach like she's some kind of saint when she's just lucky enough to have a husband who pays for her failures." The silence that followed her confession was so heavy, it felt like it was crushing the lilies in the vases, a vacuum of sound that made every heartbeat feel like a drum. I looked at Brianna, really looked at her, and realized that for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small, and I didn't feel like the ugly sister. I felt a profound, chilling pity for the woman who was so hollow inside that she was willing to murder my reputation and fake a human life just to be the center of a party. My mother didn't scream and she didn't cry. She simply reached out and took the cream-colored silk fabric of Brianna's sleeve, pulling her toward the gate of the backyard with a strength that came from a lifetime of misplaced loyalty finally breaking. "Get out," my mother said, her voice a dead flat line that held no room for negotiation. "Take your fake tests, take your stolen journal, and get out of this house. I don't ever want to see your face in this garden again until you have a real doctor's note and a heart that isn't made of glass." Brianna shrieked about how she would tell everyone on her blog that we were abusive, that we had attacked her while she was fragile, but the neighbors were already peeking over the fences with their own phones out, and as she was ushered out the gate, the golden child realized that the only person who had ever truly loved her without condition was the sister she had just tried to destroy. I stood in the middle of my ruined baby shower, my hand resting on my son's kick, realizing that while the cupcakes were cold and the champagne was broken, the air was finally, for the first time in 20 years, clean. The guests left in a daze, murmuring apologies that felt too little and far too late, and as the last car pulled out of the driveway, I was left standing in a sea of pastel lavender decorations that now felt like the remnants of a battlefield rather than a celebration of life. My mother tried to approach me, her face a map of dawning regret and tear-streaked foundation, her hands reaching out as if she could simply erase 20 years of systematic favoritism with a single desperate hug. But I stepped back, the manila envelope of my 3-year struggle still clutched to my chest like a shield. "Not now, Mom," I said, my voice sounding older and colder than I ever thought possible. "You spent 25 years choosing the wrong daughter, and you don't get to choose me now just because her lie was too big for even you to swallow." David and I drove home in a silence that was thick with the adrenaline of the confrontation, but as soon as we crossed the threshold of our house, the one Brianna had sneeringly called a participation trophy for my failures, I went straight to my office and opened my laptop because I knew Brianna's patterns, and I knew that a woman who would fake a human life to ruin a baby shower was a woman who wouldn't stop until she had completely burned the bridge she was standing on. Within 2 hours, the first retaliation hit. Brianna had posted a heavily filtered photo of herself crying on her public Instagram, where she had over 50,000 followers, claiming that I had physically assaulted her at the shower and that David had threatened her life to protect my web of lies. She was playing the victim to a massive audience, tagging local Virginia news outlets and claiming that my medical receipts were the result of high-level Photoshop that I had paid for with David's shady architect money to hide the fact that I was stealing a child. My phone began to vibrate with a violent, non-stop rhythm, hateful messages from her followers, unfollow notifications from mutual friends, and even a frantic call from David's boss asking if there was any truth to the legal drama circulating on social media that mentioned his firm. The level of entitlement was a physical weight, but she had forgotten that I was the one who had helped her through her VP promotion paperwork last year, and I knew exactly which skeletons were in her professional closet. I didn't engage with the comments. Instead, I reached out to Elena, my best friend, and a high-stakes litigation attorney who I'd seen handle predators much more dangerous than my sister. "Sarah, this isn't just family drama anymore," Elena said over the phone, her voice a sharp professional staccato that grounded me. "This is a coordinated defamation campaign aimed at your husband's career and your reputation. We're going nuclear." By Tuesday morning, the private investigator Elena hired had discovered that Brianna hadn't just found my fertility journal, she had been paying our parents' housekeeper to let her into our house while we were at our 20-week anatomy scan. More chillingly, the security footage from our hallway camera, the one David had installed after a break-in scare last summer that we never solved, showed Brianna entering our kitchen and holding my prenatal vitamin bottle, her face twisted in a look of such pure, naked malice it looked like something out of a horror movie. She hadn't just been planning to upstage me, she had been researching miscarriage-inducing herbs on the same laptop I had helped her set up, and I found a hidden folder on her cloud drive titled The Sarah Project that contained a literal timeline of how she was going to expose me and eventually inherit our mother's estate by proving I was mentally unfit. The betrayal was so deep it felt like internal bleeding, but it gave me the evidence I needed to file for a permanent restraining order and a civil suit for intentional infliction of emotional distress and defamation.
We didn't just send her a cease and desist. Elena coordinated with the HR department at the corporate firm where Brianna was a vice president, presenting them with the documented evidence of her fraudulent behavior and the police report for the stolen medical records. In a world where personal brand is everything, my sister had built hers on a foundation of sand, and the tide was finally coming in. I watched through the window of my own living room as the courier delivered the legal papers to her apartment, and for the first time in 3 years, the phantom pain in my side, the one that always spiked when Brianna entered a room, finally vanished. She tried to call our dad to beg for bail money when the police eventually questioned her for the stolen documents, but our father, the man who had always stood by and watched our mother's cruelty, finally found his spine and told her that he had no more miracles left to give her. As I sat in my nursery, rocking in the chair we had bought for a son who was currently kicking with a rhythmic, healthy strength, I realized that Brianna's golden child status had been a cage for both of us, but I was the one who had found the key in a manila envelope full of receipts. She was no longer my sister. She was a cautionary tale about the cost of envy, and as I prepared to give my final statement to the court, I knew that the woman who was faking her struggle was about to show the world the most real consequence of all, the absolute crushing power of the truth. The courtroom was a sterile, echoing chamber of accountability where Brianna's golden child status finally met a reality that her beauty and manipulation couldn't navigate. And as I sat in the witness stand, I felt the final fragments of my childhood insecurity dissolve under the weight of the truth. Elena was a force of nature, presenting the security footage of Brianna touching my medication and the Sarah Project folder with a clinical coldness that made the jury visibly recoil. Seeing my sister sit at the defense table, her designer silk dress replaced by a sensible, boring blazer her public defender likely chose, I realized the power she'd held over me for decades was just an illusion I'd been conditioned to believe. The judge didn't just grant the permanent restraining order, he authorized a full criminal investigation into the theft of my medical records and the harassment campaign, resulting in Brianna being sentenced to 2 years of probation and 400 hours of community service, alongside a massive civil judgment for defamation that effectively wiped out her VP savings she was so proud of. Her firm fired her before the first day of trial, citing a violation of their corporate morality clause, and she was forced to move back into our parents' guest room, the very room where she had plotted my destruction. Only this time, there was no promotion to celebrate and no natural miracle to use as a shield. My mother tried to play both sides for a while, sending me long, weeping emails about how family is everything and how Brianna was learning her lesson, but I had learned my own lesson. I blocked her too. I realized that being the good daughter for 25 years had gotten me nothing but a front row seat to my own character assassination, and I wasn't going to let my son grow up in a house where his grandmother's love was a weapon used to balance the scales of a sociopath's ego. David and I sold our house and moved 3 towns over, closer to his family, who had stood by us with a quiet, unwavering strength that made me understand what a functional family actually looked like. We changed our numbers, our locks, and our lives, creating a sanctuary where the name Brianna was never mentioned. 3 months later, our son, Leo, was born, a perfect, screaming, healthy miracle who arrived on a Tuesday morning, the same day the final check for the civil judgment cleared my bank account. Holding him for the first time, I felt a peace that I had never known. His existence wasn't a performance or a prop in a sisterly rivalry, but the beginning of a story that I finally had the power to write. My father, who had spent his life being a silent witness to my mother's enabling, eventually started visiting us without her, bringing Leo small wooden toys he'd made in his garage and telling me stories about his own childhood he'd been too afraid to share when Mum was around. Brianna's Instagram was eventually deleted after her followers turned into a mob of people who realized she'd faked a life and a pregnancy. She became a ghost in our social circle, a cautionary tale whispered about at weddings and holidays. I spent my first Mother's Day sitting on our new porch watching David push Leo in a swing, realizing that the struggle Brianna tried to weaponize against me was actually the fire that forged my spine. I am no longer the ugly sister or the infertile victim. I am a mother, a survivor, and a woman who knows exactly what her peace is worth. I kept that manila envelope in my office safe, not as a reminder of the pain, but as a receipt of the day I stopped letting a golden child tell me who I was. The truth doesn't just set you free, it builds a wall that the liars can never climb over. That's my read on it. I already know some of you are shaking your head right now. Tell me why in the comments. I want to see every angle.